Mr. Speaker, I can talk about the incentives that this government has in its toolbox for jobs in the province of Nova Scotia through payroll rebates and such as that. Mr. Speaker, I can talk about how the credit union loan program, how it's helping to create jobs in the province of Nova Scotia, where we increase the ceiling to that to $500,000 and increased it to a 10-year period, Mr. Speaker, as far as payback goes. Mr. Speaker, we are doing things. We are doing things, and the good people of Nova Scotia recognize that, and I hear that everywhere as I travel in this province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I invite the minister to come to Glace Bay and ask the people of Glace Bay, as people leave continuously. If you want to find them, they'll be in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. What this province needs is to change the way we do business in terms of economic development. Nova Scotia suffers from an uncompetitive tax structure which has been made worse by this government. They've hiked the HST and refused the index income tax. The NDP continues to charge a tax on tax at the pumps, which even the Premier called an immoral tax when he was in opposition. Now is the time for us to get the politics out of economic development, but the minister simply chose to slap snazzy new logos on an old slush fund. Mr. Speaker, when will this minister act to make necessary changes, ensure that Nova Scotian businesses are competitive, and end the slush fund politics? Good.
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I listened pretty intently to that, and I say my response is, Mr. Speaker, well, maybe that member should go down to Shelburne Shipyard and tell them the same thing. Maybe that member should go to Yarmouth and go to Terrio and Son and Matagan River and tell them that same thing. Maybe they should go to Seaforth Enterprises and tell them the same thing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has funded and cooperated with companies and individuals from one region of the province to the other. Mr. Speaker, in 2.5 years, we have a proven track record, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue. We will continue to do what's right for the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Premier. Sadly, serious questions have now been raised about a cabinet minister and paving work in front of his home. The Premier has spoken about taking politics out of paving and bringing forward his 5-year plan. The chip sealing work on the Renfrew Road in East Hants used provincial government equipment and provincial government workers to double chip seal a stretch where about 90% of the frontage, Mr. Speaker, is owned by the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, and members of his family. Mr. Speaker, can the Premier state that when this matter came before Cabinet, what steps did he take? What leadership did he exercise to make sure the Minister declared his conflict? What steps did he...
Thanks, boys. The honourable member for Hants West has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What leadership did he exercise to make sure the minister declared his conflict of interest and removed himself from discussions and decisions involving the 5-year paving plan?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, he's right about one thing, and that's that it's sad, Mr. Speaker. You know, the reality is that the 5-year paving plan was put forward by the Minister of Infrastructure, Transportation Infrastructure Renewal, Mr. Speaker, based on, as I said, on engineering standards, and the purpose of the member's question is to, by innuendo, slander another member of this House, and I think it's reprehensible.
The honourable member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is a very sad moment indeed, because you would think the NDP government would want to say very clearly that the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations had removed himself from all discussions involving matters which he had a personal interest. The Premier knows full well, Mr. Speaker, that the government he leads can choose to provide that assurance to Nova Scotians. The assurance as to whether decisions were made in a proper and ethical manner, Mr. Speaker. So I ask the Premier, will he undertake to explain all steps that were taken to keep the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations from participating in discussions about road work in which he had a personal interest?
The Honourable the Premier.
Again, Mr. Speaker, it is amazing. I'd love to have known what went on in the former government, that they had members of their ministers sitting around talking about paving in their own ridings, Mr. Speaker. Maybe it's just, so unbelievable. We can't imagine that they would be wasting their time that way, Mr. Speaker. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the minister brings forward his road paving plan, Mr. Speaker, as was presented here in the House.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier knows that his minister was willing in 2008 in trying to stack a petition against his road. He also knew the minister in his personal capacity had opposed the cost-shared full paving job of that road. The Premier knew the minister was experiencing political trouble for blocking the wishes of his constituents. Mr. Speaker, is the Premier now saying that no one was paying attention to see if the Minister of Service Nova Scotia was trying to get out of political trouble with his neighbours by getting the Monte Vista Road and his own road paved?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, we have a lot of challenges for the government dealing with the economy that was, of course, so endangered by the actions of the former government, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, for the details on the 5-year road improvement plan, I'm going to ask the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Renewal to explain it to the member opposite.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal.
To the member opposite and previous members of the other administration, if you think this government sits at cabinet meetings and goes through road by road, you're from another planet. We have many things to decide. We have many questions to decide. I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, I meet with staff, we look at the priorities, we publish it in the 5-year road plan, and when you see it, he saw it.
Order. Order, please. Order, please. I went through this in the last sitting in the House, using the word you. I would remind all members of the House of Assembly to please refrain from using the word you in the House of Assembly. I will now recognize the Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we're all from another planet in here. Mr. Speaker, my question's for the Minister of Education. Students and parents in Weymouth are trying to save their school. Despite having 250 students and a growing community, this school has been recommended for closure. Parents and students of Weymouth Elementary want to know why their school has been slated to close. So can the Minister of Education explain why Weymouth is at risk of losing their school?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much for the question, because I think there might be a little bit of misunderstanding. When a school is identified by a school board for review, that does not necessarily mean that it's slated for closure. There's a very robust process that everyone in this House and the province work towards to make sure that the review process is fair and is open, and that the students and the parents will be able to participate in that review with the school board. There's very clear regulations assigned to that, so I just want to clarify that if their school is up for review, then there's a very clear process and they can be involved in that process. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on his first supplementary.
I wish the Minister would be in Weymouth tonight when all the people gather there at the school and could say that to them, and maybe I'll get that word to them, but they believe on March the 12th of 2012 that school is going to be closed, and the school board is saying that. Mr. Speaker, parents in Weymouth believe the board is making a big mistake also. The board would have to build 8 new classrooms at St. Mary's Bay and would only save $120,000 in administration costs and would put 4- and 5-year-olds in schools with 17- and 18-year-olds, which is a big concern in that community. Will the Minister of Education review the recommendation and make sure that the board is making the best decision for the children and parents of a Weymouth school?
The Honourable Member, the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The school board has a mandate, and that is to make sure that rules and regulations, procedures are followed. The minister does not get involved in any of the decisions around that. We just make sure that the process is followed appropriately. In terms of the message to people in that area, that they have a role to play in being able to articulate their concerns to the school board, and the school boards have a role to play in making sure that they make the very best decisions on behalf of their students in their school board. I understand that school review processes are very stressful, but I also want to say that parents and families have a part to play in making these decisions. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on his final supplementary.
They believe the minister is involved. They believe the Minister of Finance is involved, because they're asked to make cuts to that school, and they're going to close one down if they can save $120,000 a year. A measly $120,000 a year. This is what this school board is going to try to save, to gather up a few pennies for these budget cuts, and that's what they're after. Mr. Speaker, the parents of Weymouth Elementary School are meeting tonight to discuss the future of their school. They wished I was there, but I did send a statement, and I will send the answer that you're going to give me in a moment, Madam Minister. Can they count on the Minister of Education to stand up for the children of Weymouth Elementary School for the sake of a mere $120,000 to be saved by that board?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Education supports the school boards and the decisions that they make, and the decisions they make are definitely made within the best interest of all students in their school boards. So I support the board as they go through this process, and I support the parents and the families as they articulate their concerns to the board, and this board, I trust the board will make the appropriate decisions around this. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, on August the 8th, the Minister of Community Services announced changes to the special needs regulations under the Employment Support Income Assistance Act. This meant changes for clients accessing essential items to alleviate pain and suffering. Disabilities groups and anti-poverty advocates came together to denounce these changes. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Community Services tell the House with whom did she consult in advance of this announcement to ensure this policy would not have a negative impact on Nova Scotia's most vulnerable?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for her question. Firstly, I want to get the facts out there that are correct facts. It is not a change in a policy that has affected all Nova Scotians with disabilities who receive IA. It was a clarity in the language that was going to the appeal board, which they requested clarity on what the definition of special needs means, and it affected 25 individuals over a 10-year period, and was actually a request from those individuals that were not in our policy in the first place. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, on August 17th, in an interview with CBC Radio, the Minister chastised Dalhousie Legal Aid for spreading misinformation and fear-mongering about these policy changes. Interestingly, Dal Legal Aid and Nova Scotia Legal Aid were to appear before the Community Services Committee this morning, along with the Department of Community Services, the latter at the insistence of the department and NDP committee members. They all cancelled their appearances yesterday. Mr. Speaker, this begs the question, has the Minister of Community Services placed a gag order on these organizations?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's a little bit of a funny question, because of the fact is, who puts a gag order on Dalhousie Legal Aid, Nova Scotia Legal Aid? What we have done, because we are a government that works with the people of Nova Scotia, we have invited them in because they've had some concerns. We want to make sure they understand all the facts. and what is taking place, and we hearing their side. I think that's what you call good government. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If what the minister says is true, why didn't they show up? They didn't show up for a reason. Mr. Speaker, while we were very disappointed the two legal aid societies cancelled their appearance before the committee, we were especially surprised when the Department of Community Service cancelled its appearance too. Mr. Speaker, can the minister please explain to this House how her department pulled out of a House committee appearance with almost no notice, even after its presentation had been sent to committee members? Could it be, Mr. Speaker, that the Department of Community Services only planned on appearing before the committee to counter what was being said by the legal aid societies?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it very odd that anyone would be chastising you as a government and as a minister that is working with the people of Nova Scotia. And that's what we've done with Nova Scotia Legal Aid and Dalhousie Legal Aid. We have been talking to them. Instead of ignoring them, we have been talking to them, and we said, there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of miscommunication. So what we need to do is come together as a team and let's work together for a solution for the people of Nova Scotia instead of fighting against each other. I think that's a very good thing, and we should be congratulated for that.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, the August tourism stats came out last week and they were very discouraging. They show that between January and August of this year, room nights sold in Yarmouth dropped 8% over the last year. The South Shore and Eastern Shore both saw a drop of 5%, and Cape Breton, the #1 island in North America, declined by 3%. Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Minister is, will the Minister concede that under his leadership tourism stats are moving in the wrong direction? Will he admit that he has failed the tourism industry in Nova Scotia and is presiding a slow death of family businesses in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in my place and talk about tourism in the province of Nova Scotia. As we all know, tourism is an important economic driver for the province of Nova Scotia. And you know, Mr. Speaker, tourism is down right across Canada. But on a good note, Mr. Speaker, that the Germany air flights are up, our cruise ship visitations are up. Those are all good things, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our U.S. tourism has continued with a downward trend, which has been that way for the last number of years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we just announced a new operating agency for tourism, and you know, we're expecting big things from that agency and for the future of tourism in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this time last year, the Minister was questioned about tourism stats, and he said, I quote, "The honourable member talks about me not listening. Well, I wish he listened because we have thought outside the box. I will table that." Mr. Speaker, tourism numbers are plummeting across the province, and this government has no plan to fix it. And it shows no indication they intend to fix it. Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Minister is, he tried thinking outside the box last year, and that has failed. What's the Minister's plan to increase tourism and get this failing industry back on track?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Well, You know what, Mr. Speaker, we did think outside of the box. I think I can remember kicking off a commercial last year, which I received some negative publicity about, but I think that that kickoff was well received by all Nova Scotians and all those outside of the region that viewed it. Mr. Speaker, we've got great things in mind with the new operating special agency when it comes to tourism. One of the things that we are doing, Mr. Speaker, through that agency, we are going to start a consultation process through that agency with all the key stakeholders in the area of tourism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we all know Nova Scotia is a great place to vacation. What we have to convince people, we got to do more in the way of advertising, more in the way of a lot of things, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are going to get there. Things have changed in the world. People do not travel as much today as they did 10 years ago. That's an obvious fact, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister cut funding to the Yarmouth Ferry, destroying the economy of the South Shore. He launched an expensive, self-serving tourism ad campaign, yet tourism numbers are down. The government raised the HST, it's driving up power rates and killing small, locally owned business. My question, Mr. Speaker, will he admit that he has no plan to turn the tourism industry around and put life back into rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, we do have a plan. We've had a plan. We've had a plan. When we came into government, Mr. Speaker, we noticed right away. It was obvious to us, Mr. Speaker, that previous governments sat idly by and allowed things to happen. Well, Mr. Speaker, we recognized that right away, and we put together some initiatives, and we are still doing that, Mr. Speaker. I've already mentioned
Order, please. Order, please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to minister has ended. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 65, the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act?
Bill 65, the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, I move that Bill 65, also known as the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act, now be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise in this assembly to speak with you about the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act. This updated, modern legislation will provide the backbone for job creation in the province of Nova Scotia. As Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, I quickly realized that a 1950s model for economic development could not be adapted to meet today's growing needs. The Industrial Expansion Fund was simply outdated. It was not providing the foundation nor the oversight necessary to properly support future initiatives in businesses and communities of the province of Nova Scotia. And I might add, Mr. Speaker, our Auditor General agreed. The Nova Scotia Jobs Fund will be created from this new act, which will replace the Industrial Expansion Fund, or more commonly known as the IEF. The act fulfills the recommendations of the Auditor General's report, and it will help the province make the most of jobs here, the plan to grow our economy. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say that the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act will meet the needs of the province's businesses and retain the flexibility and responsiveness. But make no mistake about it, Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act is not the same as the Industrial Expansion Fund. Our new fund is distinctively different. Provincial economic development investments are being improved with a new joint management committee. This committee will have representatives from the Premier's Office, Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, Department of Finance, Nova Scotia Business Inc., and Innovacorp. It will allow for improvements in serving Nova Scotia businesses and communities. Further, it will also attract foreign investments to the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, this joint management committee will determine whether proposals should be directed to NSBI or the new fund. This will allow for better coordination of the province's various types of investments. For most business transactions, NSBI will now be the main point of contact for the province of Nova Scotia. The new fund will pursue specific investment opportunities such as assisting communities in transition, supporting industry sectors, offering regional support, assisting small business programs, investing in infrastructure, and pursuing large industrial ventures. The Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Board will now have joint members with the board of NSBI. They will continue to advise me as Minister on how to maximize provincial investments to grow the economy and create good jobs. Mr. Speaker, this is only the beginning of transparency and accountability improvements that we are putting in place with this act. For example, the new fund, NSBI, and other provincial economic development investments will be overseen by the newly created Economic Investment Committee. This committee will help better serve Nova Scotian businesses and our communities. It will attract foreign investment to the province. The Public Service Act will also be amended to allow for the creation of this new Cabinet Committee. Mr. Speaker, under the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act, each new body plays a distinct and important role. The Joint Management Committee will ensure all the provincial agencies are working well together. And it will ensure the process is as timely and efficient as possible. The Jobs Fund Board will involve community leaders in decisions on economic investments through the new fund. And the Investment Committee will ensure accountability decisions. Mr. Speaker, we will be ready to launch the new Nova Scotia Jobs Fund on April 1. However, much of the work is already underway. We are reorganizing our investments division, adding resources, and documenting all investment procedures. We are strengthening the processes and reporting on existing files. This includes tracking and managing existing investments. Madam Chair, we are also consolidating and processing all documentation in client files, creating a client file checklist, and formalizing and application process based on best practices and client needs. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia is on the cusp of some of the greatest economic opportunity in the province's history. The shipbuilding contracts alone will create thousands of jobs and boost our economy for decades to come. But, Madam Speaker, we can't sit idly by watching to see these spin-offs. There are tremendous opportunities for growth in this province, and this new legislation will help ensure that Nova Scotians have access to good jobs that will allow them to stay and build a life here in the province of Nova Scotia. The new fund will help the province pursue regional economic initiatives. It will support programs that provide assistance to small businesses and provide community economic stability where and when needed. Madam Speaker, it is time to think big. It is time for all of us to be optimistic about our future. And this legislation lays the groundwork to help us do just that. Thank you.
I now recognize the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to enter a few words on Bill 65, the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act. Madam Chair, I dare say after yesterday, Nova Scotians are disappointed with what the only thing that really has changed from yesterday to today is the title. And perhaps maybe they've dumped a little more money in it so that they can hand around as a cabinet very quietly without defending the business plan, without identifying to Nova Scotians, without it being open and transparent. The only thing that has happened over the last few days, Madam Chair, is that we've changed the title and we've left this slush fund there for cabinet ministers to hand out as they see fit. It's rather interesting to listen to the minister talk about they are going to coordinate inside of his department a number of investments, look for job opportunities for Nova Scotia. It begs the question, what have they been doing if they haven't been doing that already? Madam Chair, what have they been doing? I can tell you what they've been doing. They've been waiting for Nova Scotia Business Inc. to reject business ideas, say, no, it doesn't fit for us, it doesn't have a business case, it won't fly, go to the government and look at the Industrial Expansion Fund. Government looks down the list and starts picking winners and losers, Madam Chair, in a very closed shop. This piece of legislation simply doesn't address anything the Auditor General brought forward. What we have is a fund that is still secretive, and anything goes. Madam Chair, I think the Minister of Finance, who is sitting there, even suggested that took place in the Industrial Expansion Fund. Well, what we have here is Industrial Expansion Fund 2. Someone referred to it yesterday in the media. It was like a Christian baptism. Go in and come out with a different name. It's the same person. Call it whatever you like. The fact of the matter is, there's nothing new or open and transparent about this piece of legislation. Nova Scotians are optimistic. Nova Scotians are trying to look to the future. They're looking for a government that is going to try to modernize itself instead of trying to find a way to go behind the cabinet door and make decisions without being open and transparent to Nova Scotians. When the Auditor General brought his report here to the House, he made a number of suggestions and accusations around the old Industrial Expansion Fund. And I was quite pleased. And matter of fact, I think if you check the record, I mentioned how happy I was that the Premier had responded, so that we're going to do something different with the Industrial Expansion Fund. I was very surprised that we waited 6 months to find out that we've changed the title, and that is about it. Madam Chair, the Industrial Expansion Fund has an oversight committee now, one that has no teeth, one that the government, on at least one occasion, went against. Madam Chair? What's the difference between the new committee? We have somebody from the Premier's office. I wonder how many members the civil service are going to say, I wonder who in the Department of Economic and Rural Development is going to go against the representative from the Premier's office. I wonder who in the Department of Finance is going to go against the representative from the Premier's office. I wonder who in NSBI or NovaCorp is going to say no to the representative on this committee. How is that open and transparent? The only thing missing is we put the minister on. We just shoved someone in from their office. The Premier will send someone from his office with their marching orders. And who do you think, out of everyone on that committee, is going to stand up and say no? Madam Chair, not a single member of that committee will say no, and government knows it. This is nothing more than a sham. And government should be embarrassed to stand up and suggest this is rebranding. This is about trying to be optimistic about the future. This is nothing more than keeping the old fund available to this cabinet. If they really wanted to try something different, maybe they would have moved the investment arm out of government to an arm's length, the business arm. Madam Chair, NSBI is looking at cases on the business model. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. Should there be some changes? Of course. And we've made some recommendations on how that could be improved. Madam Chair, we're not against government, this government or any government, recognizing they need to make an investment in an individual community and socioeconomic needs, about the only major employer the town needs help to transition the community to a new tomorrow. We're not against that. But let's call it what it is. It's not economic development. We're basing it on compassionate need for that community. We're trying to help that community transition to a better economic future. It's not economic development. And let's not kid ourselves and start calling it that. I would have more courage and more respect for any member of government who stood up and said, you know what, this business is in trouble. We don't believe it has a future, but we have a responsibility as a collective here to help this business transition to something new, or quite frankly, help this community transition to a new economic model, than to suggest throwing more money out of the Industrial Expansion Fund behind closed doors with no business case and no supporting model suggests it's a good investment for Nova Scotians and calling it economic development. Madam Chair, they know what's wrong. Nova Scotians know what's wrong. And this new program is nothing more than a renamed Industrial Expansion Fund. It was interesting to follow in the media to look at it. There isn't a single person who believed and had the wool pulled over their eyes that this was anything new and anything different. They recognized when the Premier spoke now 6 months ago, it was nothing more than to take the Auditor General's report off the table for a few months. So it's nothing more than playing political lip service to a problem that the Auditor General faced, that's identified. What government should be doing is trying to fix what the Auditor General said, instead of trying to manipulate it and rebrand it as the old model. Madam Chair, we do have an opportunity as a province, thanks to the Irvings, thanks to the tremendous work by the workers in the shipyard. We do have a tremendous opportunity. As I said earlier, we also have a responsibility as a host and as a government to find out how we're going to spread that opportunity, the economic prosperity across our province, Madam Chair. But by rebranding a failed development policy and calling it economic development for the future is simply missing the point. Is missing the point. You know, when the minister talked about this being a 1950 model, Madam Chair, if you got a 1950 car and you repaint it, it's still a 1950 car. And that's what we have here. This is a poor attempt. This is a poor attempt to try to keep the secrecy of cabinet hidden, to try to keep how they hand out money hidden inside of cabinet. We have always suggested and will continue to suggest that the business, any economic development tool, any time that we are lending public money, we should be open and transparent about it. And we should allow the business arm of government the opportunity to review that investment and tell Nova Scotians whether it is a good investment on the economic basis. And any government who wants to make a decision for any other reason, socioeconomic, helping communities transition to a new economic model, should have the courage to stand up and say that's what they're doing, and not hide behind some failed attempt to rebrand an old policy. Madam Chair, I'm sure if the Minister of Economic Development needs any advice on what was wrong with the old Industrial Expansion Fund, he just needs to lean over and speak to the Minister of Finance. Because he has clearly, and I might say, articulated so well at many occasions the flaws of the Industrial Expansion Fund. I even heard him suggest one time that they just throw in a $50 million at any time and anything goes. Well, Madam Chair, his government threw in $75 extra million and anything still goes. I would say to the Minister of Finance, the only thing different here is the title, and we threw in a little more cash to be handed out behind closed doors. And I know it probably doesn't sit well with him, because as I read over the quotes, and I don't want to read them all into the record because I know they're, no, I don't want to do that. But I know that the Minister of Finance knows the challenges, the financial challenges that our province are facing. He knows the challenges that the private sector are facing in our province, and he knows it is simply wrong to rebrand a failed policy and add more money in it to be handed out unaccounted for, without a business case, Madam Chair. And I look forward to him perhaps speaking on this piece of legislation. He may even want to speak of the new virtues of the Industrial Expansion 2, IEF 2. The identical expansion fund, yeah, that's I've heard that before. or the mean twin of the IEF. Anyway, Madam Chair, I think, as you can tell, while it may have gotten the Auditor General's report off the table a few months ago, the government has failed at dealing with what has been a long-standing issue in this province, and that is the Industrial Expansion Fund. Madam Chair, I look forward to listening to the rest of this debate, as I'm sure members of the government will tell us why all of a sudden now IEF 2 is such a wonderful piece of public policy when for such a long time they criticized the IEF, Madam Chair. And I look forward to members of government standing up and saying which one of the members of this new committee are going to go against the Premier. Because we know none of them are. We know none of them are going to suggest that he's wrong. I wonder if they're going to stand up and tell us who is on this new committee, what are the names associated with the departments, and who's going to have the courage to stand up to the representative from the Premier's office and say, no, that is not a good economic development investment. We may call it as an investment in a community towards a new economic model, but it is not a good economic development investment. Madam Chair, I would encourage this government to rethink its rebranding of the IEF and reach out to the business arm of government called NSBI and find out if there's a way to reshape that particular model so that those decisions will be made not at the cabinet table based on political need, but will be made on the business, around the business table, made on a business case. Madam Chair, with those few words, I look forward to hearing the rest of the debate.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to rise in my place tonight to speak about Bill 65, the Jobs Fund Act. The intent of the legislation may be to replace the Industrial Expansion Fund with a new name, overseen by a new Cabinet Committee, but it does nothing to improve the accountability and transparency as requested by the Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, what this government is doing with this new fund is created is nothing more than put a lipstick on a pig. It's nothing but a rebrand filled with buzzwords that this government will try to use to convince Nova Scotians they are not destroying jobs in Nova Scotia, especially rural Nova Scotia. In 2010, this government raised the HST by 2% and in the first year it raked in an additional $290 million. This tax increase is a broken promise Nova Scotian families could not afford. The increase to the HST came on the heels of the Cabinet funneling a record amount of taxpayers' money through the Industrial Expansion Fund with no paper trail. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotians deserve to know where their money is being spent and what the criteria are of having access to the government's investment fund. In 2010, the Auditor General made recommendations to improve the accountability of the fund. This minister had an opportunity to create a fund with clear, fair, merit-based processes for investment decisions, but instead this government has chosen to further politicize its use. But I've got to give credit to the NDP for one thing. They know how to turn a political crisis into partisan advantage. They used the MLA expense scandal to get rid of third-party oversight of MLA expenses and take over control. The Industrial Expansion Fund has been riddled with criticism, especially by members of that government when they were in opposition. I'd be interested to know if the Minister and the Premier agreed with the member from Halifax-Chignecto when he labelled it a political slush fund, saying, well, it's obvious that this government intends to keep both spigots open. What is about to happen is that the Cabinet will maintain control of a slush fund that will not just be on occasion. Well, it's clear from this bill that this government wants to keep both spigots open. To take control of Novacorp, Nova Scotia Business Inc., the Farm and Agriculture Loan Boards. Instead of a problem with political interference over just Industrial Expansion Fund, now all spending partners will be subject to the same partisan scrutiny, masquerading under the guise of aligning government priorities. Now I'd like to switch gears for a minute back to political naming of this fund. By infusing the word jobs in the name of the fund, it does nothing to improve its controls. This is nothing more than another example of this government's political spin. It appears this Cabinet and its committee will have up to $400 million at its disposal to buy Nova Scotia jobs with little controls to show the value of those investments. The Auditor General wanted to see this government implement processes and plans for Industrial Expansion Fund and develop incentive assessments and approval mechanisms, not just change its name from one form another bureaucratic Cabinet committee. It's ironic to see this government's actions. On one side, it's patting itself on the back for a publicity campaign for shipbuilding, and on the other side, it's applauding the non-politically based process used to award the contract. It's unfortunate this government did not take the opportunity and necessary steps to outline clear criteria for the fund and make it fair, merit-based processes. Instead, they have simply made things worse. More government bureaucracy, more red tape, and making life harder for Nova Scotia families. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's certainly my pleasure to speak on Bill 65, the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act. And I truly am happy to rise in my place as the critic for rural and economic development for the province. These are issues and things that I do have a bit of an affinity with. I enjoy the balance sheets and looking at the economics of organizations and companies and businesses and seeing where the issues are and where the opportunities and certainly the challenges are. So I'm looking forward to it. I was thinking back on some of my work experience that's kind of relevant to economic development, and ironically, the most successful job I had in the private sector was one in Cape Breton where we trained people to work in Alberta. So I think, that's kind of at issue here fundamentally. That's not finger pointing or anything of that nature, but that's just the reality we live in. And I think it's incumbent on the House to curve that and go in the opposite direction and bring our people home and keep them here. So that's certainly what we're looking for. And again, as has been mentioned several times, and it will be mentioned several times again, the Irving Shipbuilding contract, I can tell you, all the way down in Glace Bay, that was felt, and we are certainly jumping for joy because, again, that doesn't represent jobs in Halifax, that represents people coming home. So we're certainly proud of the Irvings and the Nova Scotia bid, and it's going to mean good things for all of us as Nova Scotians. So certainly good news, but of course we also have challenges. And again, this fundamentally breaks down to jobs and the issue of outward migration for employment opportunities elsewhere. Had a really interesting event today at Feed Nova Scotia, and I was joined by the member from Inverness, Cumberland North, and Halifax Atlantic at Feed Nova Scotia, where they released the numbers on the usage of food banks. And again, those numbers are somewhat stagnant. It has a lot to do with changing demographics more so than an increase or a decrease in the usage. But certainly, when you look at the sheer numbers of people, kids, families, seniors using food banks in Nova Scotia, it's certainly something that is a challenge for all of us. And again, all of these things are interrelated to the economic development and the health of our province's economy. Just again, to start about the unemployment in Cape Breton. Currently, the number is 15%, and I know that the honourable members that are from Cape Breton, all of us would certainly attest. If you really looked at what's happening on the ground, it's not even close to 15%. It's probably upwards of 20% or more, because people have just given up. The participation rate has changed. People have they've left the workforce, the active workforce, so they're not counted in those statistics that amass a 15% unemployment rate. So certainly those numbers are bad, and they are at the current time decreasing and getting worse in terms of the job and economic outlook in Cape Breton. And once again, you take away the Alberta jobs, those people who work 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, or 21 and 8 in Fort McMurray, then the people who are without work in Cape Breton probably triples the number that's recorded. So we certainly do have our economic development challenges, there's no doubt about that. And this, to me, is where government policies become key. And what the playing field is and how we create a plan and develop a plan for economic development is what this is about. And again, economic downturn, shrinking economy, those types of things, it's not about always firing money and complaining that there's not enough money injected in economic development plans and policies. This is about how it's spent. If you talk to any economist worldwide, you'll see that the worst time to pull public dollars from investment in economic development is a time when there's a downturn. We've got to get all we can and muster up the dollars that are there and inject those into sound policies and ones that we know are going to have impact and are going to affect our people on the ground every day. So, this isn't about cutting investment, but it's pivotal to make sound decisions. That's where I hope that these few words today will help impact this House and affect positive change for all Nova Scotians. I did listen to the minister, and I did see the bill prior to coming here today, and I would honestly say that I am somewhat disappointed, and the reason why is that this really is, as far as I can tell, and maybe I'm missing something, and the minister and the government side can enlighten me on this, but it just looks like a remarketing or a rebranding of a program that's in place. The government speaks about better families and living within our means and making tough and necessary choices, and of course that's the case, but I don't think any meaningful changes were made. I just think it was simply renamed, and again, nothing in that bill would indicate otherwise. So, if we just rename it and virtually change it, nothing else that's part of this bill and part of this act, then where are we in this? I'm not sure. It's just it's not a restructuring of the lending model or the funds. It's just calling it by another name and changing a few small pieces to the act. And what caught me right off the bat in reading the bill was Section 3.1 of the bill, which says the Industrial Expansion Fund, established under the former Industrial Development Act, is continued for the purpose of this act as a special account in the Office of the Deputy Minister of Finance, to be known as the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund. So it's continued as is, and it's a special account, and they're the words that sort of jump off the page. I don't know what's any different about this new act versus the old IEF, so I guess that's what the question is, Madam Speaker. And I know that the government is upset and doesn't like to hear that, but I just can't see anything different. And I was upset reading the Chronicle Herald this morning when the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism was quoted as saying, "It's going to work much the same way that the old IEF worked. The IEF provides incentives. The IEF provides loans. The IEF did things that created good jobs in the province of Nova Scotia," end quote. So if it's going to work quote, in the same way, end quote, then what have we done other than renamed it and changed a couple small components? And if the old model works so well, and that's what we're going with, give or take, then why did the Auditor General hammer the IEF for not having tight controls and oversights? That's I'm sure the questions that Nova Scotians are interested in knowing. And also, related to that, why did the AG suggest that the IEF be controlled by Nova Scotia Business Inc.? I think that's a reasonable suggestion and a reasonable idea for where these funds would go, but yet, other than having one member as part of this oversight committee, NSBI have a proven track record of controlling and making good decisions, objective decisions based on business plans, not just at the whim of cabinet at the time, and that's where we have to change the playing field for these funds. And again, the Premier said in response to the AG that last May that the IEF would be replaced, and I just don't see how it is replaced. So there are the questions I think I would like to know, and I'm sure Nova Scotians would like to know. I truly do believe that we've missed an opportunity to be open and transparent here because we've just changed the name and we haven't done that much. And the minister did talk about increasing accountability and transparency, but at the same time, it's very clear that the public doesn't have access to this information. So if it's open and transparent, I'm not sure who it's open and transparent to. If the public can't look and scrutinize how these decisions were made and what business plans were applied, and again, who the winners and losers were. And what I see in a nutshell is that this has been called by the media and by members and by Nova Scotians as a political slush fund. And what I see from this legislation is that this doesn't really do anything in terms of that relationship, and that the government and the cabinet doesn't want to relinquish control of these funds. And I think that the handling of this act and these funds is troublesome in terms of where the government and the province of Nova Scotia is heading with economic development. I truly don't believe that politicians make the best choices on economic development. What I do believe is that these things can ultimately be decided, or at least be presented in the private sector. And it's private sector individuals, businesses, and organizations that know these things. This is their job. This is what they do. If our economy hums and rolls along, then it's those businesses that created that, and those businesses will benefit like everybody else. So we have businesses who are willing to do those analysis and look at those market forecasts and consider all these business factors that go into the business environment to make decisions on where money should go. Public dollars, by the way, should go. And I think that should be the brain trust that we're accessing here to make big decisions and major decisions that affect jobs in the province. And we really do, we've used for a long time a plan and a philosophy of one-off investments in projects and in opportunities that we see fit. And those one-off injections, if they don't work, become, although they should be considered to be sunk costs, actually what we've done over a long period in this province has said, well, we're already invested, so let's go another $2 million and let's do a payroll rebate and let's do, another injection and call it some kind of different thing. And that hasn't worked for anybody. And obviously these things, the locations are political, how we make these decisions are political. And again, that's been the philosophy for a long time. So I don't believe that that's the best choice for public dollars, Madam Speaker. And once we're pot committed to these things and we keep pumping the money there, and that's not the way to do it. And what I do believe, and I've shared before with the House, is that we do, and the minister did mention it in his remarks today, we need a strategy based on core competencies within the regions. There's things that we all do as regions in this province. There's things that we do well. And let's take advantage of those. For Cape Breton, there's very simple, very basic things that we could focus on tomorrow. And, it's one thing to stand up and criticize the government and suggest they should be doing things better and differently. But what are the answers? Well, for Cape Breton, as one example, there are very specific examples and a very specific answer that the minister and the the government side should be aware of. First of all, as mentioned by the member from Cape Breton North during question period, we are the #1 island destination in North America, #3 in the world. #3 in the world, folks. And there's tourism opportunities there. And I know that the world tourism numbers are down and they've decreased over the last little bit, but that doesn't mean people aren't traveling. It means we have to do a better job in the marketing and in the targeting of those people who are likely to come to Cape Breton and come to Nova Scotia. That's the plan. And tied to that, we've got a very difficult environment for establishing and creating tourism infrastructure because of the tax system, the red tape that businesses face, the power rates are very difficult for businesses who are starting up, entrepreneurs to deal with. So those things they hinder tourism. So it's easy to just use the global numbers and say tourism is shrinking, but specifically that doesn't mean we can't carve out our own niche and make sure we're getting maximum tourism numbers, Madam Speaker. So that's one example for Cape Breton. Secondly, renewable energies, we've got them all. We've got tremendous opportunities with tidal, solar, geothermal, which we've seen in bits and pieces so far and will increase over time. And of course, wind. We've got all those opportunities in Cape Breton, in Nova Scotia, but there doesn't seem to be a razored focus on those things, and that's where the new economy's going. And that's where we have to be. And if that's the case, then we'd love to see it, Minister. So that would be fantastic. One example, I've been here, one example that I'm proud of that's opening this week is the Center for Sustainability and Energy Environment at Cape Breton University. And that's going to, this is the things I'm talking about specifically. This center will identify 4 specific research chairs that will look at these things specifically. It's easy to make the statement, well, we're investing in those things, Minister, and you can certainly comment on if I'm missing something here. You can certainly stand up and correct me, because this is what I see. Well, what I see is that we've got to target and work on very specific opportunities for these things. And again, it's one thing to research them, but what the focus is that I think is a little different from the past at the CSEE at Cape Breton University is that the focus obviously will be on the commercialization of this research and these chairs. So I think that there are tremendous opportunities that we don't want to let go by the wayside. The other opportunity that we have in Sydney, in Cape Breton, is the port development. And I think that what I spoke about earlier with the private sector is this is a perfect example. The governments, the levels of governments have invested in this opportunity, have invested in this program. Now it's not going to go any further unless the private sector dive into this thing and take ownership of it and understand what the markets are, understand what the infrastructure requirements are, and market this thing to the world and to these international shipping firms and the industry itself to come to Sydney and use the port. So these opportunities are here and now, but we've got to be on the same page and working towards these as common goals. Again, Minister, yeah. So it is about strategic environment, and it is about the business environment. And again, if we're straddled with things in the business environment that make entrepreneurs less likely to take that risk, then it's hurting our economy and hurting the prospects of our economy. So, let's identify those core competencies within each region, and let's strategically invest based on merit and based on a business plan, as opposed to the old practices that have been just, secretive and closed doors and injecting one-off things that we get committed to and can't get out of. So. And let's give the private sector the opportunity to make their own decisions and grow the economy. And government can set that foundation and get out of the way. And I think that, all parts of the House certainly agree with that. And just for the member from Halifax Citadel, Sable Island, I do want to table and read some quotes from the Minister of Finance regarding the IEF. No, I just thought it would be. You mentioned him several times, so yeah. And the member can follow me. The member can stand at his place and follow me afterwards if he's.
Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay has the floor.
Speaker. Quote, the government knows that it's the only fund with virtually no controls, and when they want to spend a lot of money quickly, it's the industrial expansion fund they turn to. End quote. Second quote, it's very worrisome to see the roof being blown off spending limits. It doesn't bode well for provincial finances. Third, each individual project in itself is a worthy project, but what they have done is they have allocated themselves $175 million when the budget says it was going to be about $23 million. There's no new budget for the legislature. There are no plans, no discussions of options. They've just given themselves the money to spend whenever they want, however they want. And finally, quote from the Minister of Finance, "The problem here is that government can allocate itself a very large amount of money, in this case $50 million, without ever informing the House, without requiring the approval of the House, without any accountability to the House. That can't be right, and the Auditor General has said so." And I will table those quotes from the Minister.
I think he said it twice.
Very insightful. So I will end in closing. I do have more to say, and I will simply say this. From what I can see, reading the bill, understanding the information that's available to us, this bill is simply rebranding. There's nothing new in it. It's still cabinet controlled. It's not open and accountable to the public. There's no increased accountability whatsoever. So we are left with the IEF under a new name. And I think, Madam Speaker, that the taxpayers in Nova Scotia deserve more. Thank you.
Leonard, when you're minister, we'll start quoting you too.
I now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to rise today and to have a few words to add to the debate on Bill 65, which is called the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act. And that's a very slogan-y kind of an act name, I must say. As has been said by the earlier speakers, we're seeing very little here in the way of substance. We're seeing a name change. And I think that we need to look a little bit further at how this came about and the kind of criticism that was brought by the Auditor General about the former fund. I think if we look at the bottom line, the major recommendation coming from the Auditor General was that the function of the IEF should really rest with NSBI, with the Nova Scotia Business Inc., and not be a separate fund that operates behind closed doors in secrecy and certainly with no transparency and little accountability. That really is the bottom line here. And I think while we're looking at it, we should remember that when the auditor went in to do the audit, it was in the report about 2 years ago, he was refused access. In fact, it was less than 2 years ago because the audit occurred under the NDP government, under the current government in power, and they refused to give the auditor the information that he required to audit the accounts and the business of the Industrial Expansion Fund and NSBI, both. And it was the only time we've ever seen an audit come back here to the legislature where the auditor had to say that he was unable to give an opinion because he was denied access to the information needed. And that came up, very strongly in his report. The Minister of Finance at the time said that the Auditor General didn't have the powers that he needed, the powers for confidentiality and that kind of discretion. And yet when asked, the auditor said he had never previously heard of any other place in Canada where this had occurred, and that no previous government here in Nova Scotia had ever unilaterally denied the access to information that was done in this case. So, again, it was an unprecedented case of secretism. He said he'd not seen it anywhere else in Canada. We had asked, it had never occurred that the audit had been taken place previously for economic development. Under the Conservative government, there'd been an audit and information had been made available. Well, now this year we do have a new act for the Auditor General, and the audit proceeded for the IEF and NSBI. And the main recommendation was that NSBI should be given this kind of authority to handle the work that had previously been done by the IEF, again, as a secretive, cabinet-controlled fund. And the word slush fund has been used and was used by the government when they were in opposition repeatedly. This is a fund that does not follow the rigor of a business case and didn't follow any kind of I guess, thoroughness in terms of recording their information, basing it on even documenting what was going on, to the point where the auditor, when he was looking at cases, had to actually go through individual people's emails to get bits and pieces of the puzzle to piece together what information was available to Cabinet when decisions were being made. So it was being made without a checklist, and the minister today in his opening comments about this bill said that now they're going to make this unprecedentedly marvelous move of having a checklist of things that should be in place before you make millions of dollars of investment in private industry in this province. And I mean, that is just so basic. It's alarming that it was never done in the past. And you know, what I really thought was important was that we look at why NSBI was set up in the first place. We have created, you know, a very large organization in this province that is responsible for many of the things that are mentioned in this act. When we talk about international trade, trying to attract international business, trying to restructure our regions, offering help to industry sectors, pursue regional and strategic economic initiatives. Is that not exactly what NSBI is doing? And isn't that why they were set up, to be the business arm, to have the business expertise on their board and in their offices? That's exactly what they were to do. And the government of the day then had the idea that they would set up NSBI to be that group that would provide business loans and support based on a solid business case, and that they would have the expertise to do that. And the IEF, although they left it in place, was to be just a small tool, something that had shrunk greatly in size. What happened over time, of course, was the IEF ended up giving out and supporting business with more dollars than NSBI's budget, despite the fact that NSBI has a large organization, I think, you know, relatively large organization across the province that had this mandate to do exactly what we see before us in this bill. And so, you know, changing the name of the IEF and now calling it Nova Scotia's Jobs First Fund Act, you know, Jobs Fund Act, it's hard to know which because there's so many slogans on the go right now. But I understand why the name has jobs in it, because you want to position it along with some of the other positive economic news that's going on right now. But this bill isn't positive economic news. It's more duplication, and it's an unnecessary step. It should have been that the Auditor General's recommendation to hand this over to the NSBI should have been taken. Why on earth have we created the expertise and the organization with the skills of the NSBI without actually giving them more control over these exact things? And in the government's press release, it names exactly what it is, saying that they will now be responsible for promoting economic growth. Well, that sounds exactly like NSBI. Help restructure economic regions. Well, we know that there's an effort to help in some of the regions hardest hit, like the Yarmouth area, which has certainly suffered from a decline without the ferry. Cape Breton, which is suffering, you know, with many challenges. In fact, you know, we're talking about the out-migration from Cape Breton. The previous member, our critic for economic development, spoke about that. And I think that, you know, it's a sad day when we see so many people heading out west. And I spoke to one of my constituents today who's planning to meet his daughter and her family in Truro for a meal before they head out with the U-Haul and the van and everybody packed up to go out to Alberta, because they have jobs there and they've lost their jobs at the call centre in New Waterford. So, you know, it's a sad day when you see that they're saying goodbye to their family in Nova Scotia because of a lack of opportunities. So it was my understanding from the get-go that NSBI would be the organization that should be doing that. And under the management of this current government, we've seen the IEF grow even larger than it had. You know, as I said, to the point where it actually doled out more money to business than NSBI did, which makes a mockery of setting up an arm's length and skilled and well-informed and experienced organization. Now, I noticed that the minister said that this new new jobs fund is going to share the same board. Somehow there's going to be, I guess, a sharing of the expertise of that NSBI board. But I think that that's a pretty lame way of utilizing their skills. Really and truly, we're talking here about a fund that, you know, if it had outlived its usefulness, it was because it was secretive and it was taking place behind closed doors. And there will be no change in that. We won't here in the legislature know anything more about the kinds of projects that are coming before the cabinet through this new IEF, or we called it, what did we call it, the imitator IEF. It's the same basic mechanism, and the government really has just in their own way ensured that they have control over millions of dollars that they can continue to pass out to businesses that they choose, that they pick and choose from. And I think that's what really the Auditor General had taken exception to, and it will be better if there's a checklist and that at least companies provide some reasonable background in terms of financial information and projections, and make a case for themselves. But, you know, we need to have the assurance that this is being done in a professional manner. And setting up a cabinet committee that's now going to call itself the Economic Investment Committee is, you know, is just another level of smoke and mirrors, because there's no guarantee that members of cabinet will have any of the expertise needed to be that Economic Investment Committee. They're going to be just as reliant on the kinds of information that are given to them and the information that they are provided with from staff. And so I just don't think it's going to be any more effective than having cabinet themselves looking at this. And again, it's politically expedient for the government to leave this in place and to just rename or rebrand the old program with this new name. If it had truly become too old-fashioned, I think you should have left the IEF in place and just changed the rules, tightened up the controls, gone about it in a more transparent way, because this again gives the impression that something more serious is happening than indeed is happening. And I really question, and you know, our leader, our leader of the opposition here on this side of the House, had raised the question about what really was the Department of Economic Development doing previously if we now are setting up this separate fund and giving them, through this Act, all of these very same obligations or mandate. You know, when we see things like just promoting economic growth, that we have a department that's supposed to do that. We already had this duplication in place, and now we have formalized a third level that's going to be active in exactly the same areas. And if one thing for this small province I think is clear when you travel, is that a lot of businesses feel that they can't get any help from government, that because of the sector they're in, whether it's retail or food and beverage or some tourism operators, feel that they have no access to any support from government. They get very little help. They complain that they don't get much business advice or support, and yet we have so many different organizations that are working in that field. We have field workers, you know, with NSBI, with economic development. We have, you know, different business support banks and so on. And yet a lot of the sectors that are active in this province are just not eligible for any of that support, certainly not for any financial incentives or any loans or guarantees that are offered to a lot of perhaps large employers. But I think all of us know that often the excitement that goes around with some of these announcements where we expect large employers to come in and create jobs, it often does not materialize, and there are some significantly large disappointments in Nova Scotia's history of trying to do that. You know, and I hope we won't be seeing any more in the near future, and I know that in light of the good news around shipbuilding, which we are all hoping will lead to other spin-offs, you know, with that in mind, I really hope that we will see, you know, no more of those fiascos that have emerged in the past. But having a fund that can be accessed by cabinet, out of sight from the eyes of the public and out of reach from the legislature, no oversight, no accountability here in the legislature, that to me is a dangerous precedent. And if anything, that is an old-fashioned idea that should have been shelved before we got to this point today. So I think the important thing is that Nova Scotians realize that there is no real justification for creating this new act and renaming the old fund. We had an act in the past. We had a fund in place, and the changes could have been made to that. And this idea of rebranding it into some jazzy new jobs fund is really not, doesn't have any substance, is what I would say, Madam Speaker. And with that, I am looking forward to hearing what people may have to say at law amendments and hoping to see, again, where this goes as it comes back to the legislature later. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure and sort of with disappointment I stand up and talk about this bill, Bill 65, Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act. I ran a business for a long time in this province, and I can tell you it was difficult to run a business then, and that was over 20 years ago, about 20 years ago, I guess, and it's even more difficult to run it today. Actually, it's extremely difficult to run a small business in Nova Scotia. The present government has brought forward Bill 100, which has had a devastating effect and will have a devastating effect on small businesses in Nova Scotia. And if you do your math and you find out who actually is employing people in the province on a long-term sustainable basis, it's small business. One-person business, 5 people, even up to 30 or 40 people. Those are the people that are actually making the economy in Nova Scotia go. It's nice to have the big contract that comes from the federal government for the frigates and the shipbuilding project they have, and that's wonderful. We need more of those, and they should continue. But the small business is a person that comes out, does repairs to your vehicle. It could be anything in the province. Now, the problem is, as we move forward with this new fund, which is supposed to be a new fund, it just appears to be the exact same fund as it was before. There's no more accountability in it or anything else. So it makes you wonder why they're even bothering with this bill. Is it the government doesn't know how to develop businesses in Nova Scotia? I think that's the problem. They don't have any idea how to do it. They have not talked to the business community. They do a lot of talking to the unions and see what the unions want to do, but that doesn't necessarily generate any business or any confidence in Nova Scotia by business people to indeed help grow our economy. You see continuously young men and women go into Alberta for a better job, and guess what? They don't come back. They don't come back. And you're losing some of the brightest young people and the hardest working young people out of this province. Because one thing, when you go to Alberta, I've been told by friends of mine that have gone there and my friends' children that have gone there, and they say if you're from Nova Scotia, they'll hire you on the spot because you've got good work ethic. And that's one thing that Nova Scotia does have. We have a good, solid workforce. I believe that there's a lot of things that we have to readdress here in the province, and this government is definitely not doing it. It's going backwards, actually. And you see how difficult it makes it for business to operate in Nova Scotia. And as the businesses realize this, I have many friends still that run businesses, and they're really seriously looking at moving to Moncton. That's a scary situation. You look at that and see what happens. Many of the companies that one friend of mine that has quite a large business, and he tells me that his suppliers, major companies that were Halifax here in Burnside and Dartmouth that he'd been dealing with for years, have actually moved their whole operation to Moncton. Why did they move to Moncton? Well, the reason they moved to Moncton was property taxes are lower GST rate, lower gasoline prices, lower corporate taxes, lower income tax, and the list goes on and on. And I can tell you, to get your bottom line solid in a business is very difficult to do. And every dollar that cost is added, cost that you can't recover, it means that you're less competitive. And it means you can't buy that new piece of equipment that you have to be competitive with someone outside the province. And today, in reality, when you're competing in Nova Scotia, you're competing with companies not just in New Brunswick or just in Eastern Canada. You're competing a lot of times with companies in the US, Europe, even in Asia now. So with easy transportation and with easy communications today, it's so easy to do business any place in the world. And I can tell you, I've done business all over the world. And it was easy enough 20 years ago, and I can tell you it's a whole lot easier now. With the advent of the computer systems that have really made doing business outside the province and in other time zones a lot easier. The province has not picked up on this. They have done nothing to help improve business in this province and help this economy grow. I would like to see nothing more than the young people who graduate from university and community college stay in Nova Scotia and help make our economy strong. We're going to have a crisis very soon for labor. And the solution is, the government says solution is immigration. Well, that's only a small part of the solution. The real solution is to train our young people here, train them properly, and get them to stay in Nova Scotia. And because the only reason they will stay here is if they've got a good possibility of a good, well-paid job that they know is going to be here for a long time. That isn't the case in Nova Scotia at the present time. And it hasn't been for some time. So when you ask what the problem is, why isn't that the case? Well, the case is, if you've got a bad tax structure, a structure that is regressive not only to business, but to the people that live in this province, all of a sudden you realize that indeed people can't operate businesses here. And I can quite frankly tell you, and I will tell you this up front, if I was to run a business again, it would not be in Nova Scotia. It would not. I love Nova Scotia. I'd like to be here. But I could not afford to run a business in Nova Scotia. It'd be so much cheaper for me to operate a business in the U.S., in New Brunswick, any place but Nova Scotia. And that's a sad thing to say as a Nova Scotian. And I love Nova Scotia, and I'll probably live here till the day I die. But the problem is, if I'm thinking like that, and I'm not going to run a business in Nova Scotia probably again, who knows, I may someday, but the businesses out there, the people that are actually running these businesses are thinking the same way. And that's a scary, scary situation. Those are the people that are going to hire 5 people, 10 people, 50 people. And they can just easily hire them in New Brunswick. They can easily hire them in New England or in the southern U.S. or any place else they want to live. Because the time has been, over the time, we've seen the environment for business die in Nova Scotia. And it's not good. It's really not good. If you want your children to stay here, the members of the government over there and the NDP want to have the children stay in Nova Scotia and work. I wonder how many of them over here, there's a question I've never asked, actually have their children working outside the province. Be an interesting question to have answered. And maybe someday that the Minister of Finance is deciding that he's going to destroy the economy some more by raising more taxes, more fees, putting income tax up again, and all the things that hurt business, will realize that indeed some of the young people from their own families are being hurt by this regressive tax regime and the regressive way in which business is operated. There was some joking from the other side over there about the Yarmouth Ferry. Well, I can tell you it's no joke. They talk about the tourism industry dropping, and the numbers are in now. Last year they said, oh, it was growing again, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. But now, guess what? The numbers are in, and it's not good. It is not good. And it's hurting. It was numbers quoted today from the colleagues in the Conservative Party about how 5% reduction on the Eastern Shore on tourism. That's a huge blow to an area that really has not a lot of tourism. I know some of the operators, and I've been talking to them over the last couple of years, and they say the Yarmouth Ferry has just about destroyed their business. They've got bookings down as much as 60% in this area, in the area I represent. Now, when you think about that ferry not being there, you think about just the immediate area around Yarmouth, but it has affected the whole province. Another regressive decision by this present government that's decided just randomly that let's shut this thing down, let's don't do anything about it, and everything will be just fine. It'll be just fine. And, well, indeed, it's not fine. And we're starting to slowly see the deterioration of the businesses. And the trouble with business is it takes a long time for a regressive taxation or other policies that are put in place for government till the business finally says one day, this is it, we can't take anymore, we can't do this anymore, we're going to have to lay people off, we're going to have to move, we're going to have to shut our business down, whatever the case may be. People and business make decisions every day, every single day, on what they're going to do, so at the end of the year or the end of that particular month, they know they will make money. And if a business doesn't make money, it cannot operate. It just cannot operate. There's all kinds of basic principles in operating a business. And I could bet you I can ask the whole group over there in government, the NDP, and not one of them would know one of those principles. Not one of the principles. Never mind all the principles that you do need to run a business. And those things are all floating all the time. And when you work at the things that have to be, and I'm getting some comments over there what some of these things are, and actually those are good things, but actually not the things you need to do to make money. So, and a business is about making money. And if we don't work in Nova Scotia and create, as politicians, an environment for business, an environment that the businesses can thrive here, work here, export their goods, or displace goods that are being imported into the province, our economy will not grow. Every single civil servant, every single politician, every single municipal councillor, every single person that works for government in any way, except the federal government in Nova Scotia, and we'll accept them because their money comes from Ottawa, which is an influx into the province. But anybody that's paid by taxes that are paid in Nova Scotia add absolutely zero to the economy. Zero. And everybody gets after me when I say that, but it's true. All we do is recirculate money. And with the government now being at, I think, 43% of the total employment in the province, we're going in the wrong direction. And after you don't generate any income into the province from all those 43% of the people who are totally working in the province, then you add in the people that are unfortunately on social assistance for whatever reason. They absolutely add nothing to the economy. You add people that have government pensions, and we all talk about government pensions all the time, that are from the province of Nova Scotia or from a municipality. They add nothing to the economy. The ones that do add to the economy are the ones from the federal government because it's money coming into the province from outside of Nova Scotia. Those do. But when you add all that up, we've got a very, very dire situation happening in Nova Scotia. And people are going to laugh at me. They can say whatever they want, but I guarantee you it's coming. And it's coming quicker than you would think. And when we watch this deterioration happen, it's a job here, it's a job over here, it's another job over here. You don't really notice it, right? And all of a sudden, your neighbor decides, well, he can't pay the mortgage on his house anymore because he lost his job in a small business. Now, what happens? He then has to sell his house or let the bank take it back. Well, I can tell you what I'm seeing in my riding right now. And it's not good. I'm seeing people come in on a continuous basis, that their properties are being sold for property taxes in arrears. And that's a whole other issue. Property taxes in arrears. And some of these are only $1,500. And a house that someone has had their whole lives are going to lose their house for $1,500. Why are they going to lose their house for $1,500, you ask? Well, I can tell you why. Because a person doesn't have a job. They don't have a job. The possibility of getting a job, can't get one. Why can't they get one? Because our economy is in a mess. It's an absolute mess in this province. You can quote all the numbers you want. Government has increased spending. And to cover that increase in spending, it's actually put taxes up. Everything you can imagine. The GST, for every $10,000 you clear, you have lost $200 out of that $10,000. That don't sound like much. But to a family that has been struggling for years, struggling to make sure the power bill's paid, make sure their insurance paid, trying to pay their taxes, trying to have a vehicle good enough that they can get back to work, back and forth to work, and just minor things. If they're real lucky, have a vacation once in a while just in the province, never mind anywhere else, or go visit some of their friends or relatives somewhere in the province, they can't do those things anymore. Now they're struggling to see if they can pay their oil bill. They're not insuring their homes anymore, and I've seen that too in my riding. When people come in and they've had the catastrophic accidents happen, and they'd have no insurance. So it is difficult. It's difficult. And you see these things all happening, and you wonder why. We're in a regressive tax situation in this province. There's no plan for economic development in this province anymore. You're already starting to see by the tourism numbers. I mean, I think it's the first time probably in history that the tourism numbers in this province and the tourism dollars that this province that generates, and those are real revenue numbers, have dropped. They've dropped quite substantially, and I think next year they're going to drop even worse. And the excuses are, well, people aren't traveling as much as they were, and all kinds of things. But why would they come to Nova Scotia? I can think of lots of good reasons. Beautiful province, really hospitable people here. But when you come up from, say, from New England someplace to visit Nova Scotia, and your gas is 84, 85 cents a liter, and you come here, and we're really low today at 125, and they look at it and say, holy jumpins, this is some expensive. And then they look at the GST at 15%, and you come from most of the states in the U.S., and it's 4 or 5% if there's any value-added tax. So when you look at these things, and then they have the fees for accommodations, and it's just, the numbers go on and on. So they have one short trip to Nova Scotia, and they say, well, it's a beautiful place, really nice people, service is good, the food is good in Nova Scotia, but boy, we can't afford to come back. We just simply can't afford to come back. And that's unfortunate. That really is unfortunate, because that means, in the tourism industry, we've got a lot of operators out there that are struggling to survive. We've seen hotels close already in Yarmouth, and probably more to come. And that means a lot of people that would, even if it's a seasonal job, they can get through the year, and they can look after their families and do the things that families deserve to have the right to do in Nova Scotia. But that is not what's happening here today. What's happening here today, we're seeing more and more people struggling, more and more people having difficulty paying their taxes, more and more people have difficulty heating their homes, paying their power bills, and doing all the things they possibly can. And even if they can do those things, even if they can do them, what's happening is that repair that you need done in your house, you can't get done anymore. You can't afford to do it. And if you can't afford to do it, that means your home is going to go down in value. But not only that, but that means a carpenter that used to come and do the work for you, you can't afford to pay him anymore, so he's got less work to do. It just absolutely multiplies over time, but it's a slow death. And the death is on the way. I mean, it's on the way. It's like having some kind of a bad cancer that's eating at your body, and you can't do anything about it. You know it's there, and you know if there was some kind of treatment, you should be able to get it resolved. But in this case, there's treatment there. There's ways to fix this economy, and there's ways to work and improve the economy in Nova Scotia. But I cannot see anything that this government has done to do that. Nothing. And indeed, they've gone the other way. And this bill, Nova Scotia Jobs Fund Act, I have no idea why they put this bill forward. It's just the old Industrial Expansion Fund under a different name, where, you know, political decisions can be made and controlled. I mean, the Auditor General talked about it already, and many times. So the Premier says he's going to get rid of it, so what's he do? He changes the name on it. I guess that's getting rid of it in Nova Scotia. And I wonder how many jobs in Nova Scotia that the present government has got rid of. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting when the tally finally comes down. And you see a negative growth. I think it's a Bank of Nova Scotia form I read a little while ago. And Nova Scotia showed the job growth in Eastern Canada. And Nova Scotia was the only one in a negative situation. All the other provinces were positive. Although some of them weren't very positive, but they were still positive. But Nova Scotia was a negative, an absolute negative number. So that tells you what's going on here is really, really hurting our local economy. Now, in Halifax Regional Municipality, the economy pretty well can run on its own now. It's big enough that it can. You take enough business out of Burnside, though, or the Lakeside Industrial Park, and all of a sudden that's going to change, because those are the people that pay a huge amount of property taxes, a huge amount on their businesses. And that will mean that there'll be less services, and also the property tax will have to go up to provide the services that already exist, never mind any new ones. So the whole issue of economic development is really complex. I know the present government hasn't got an idea in the world how to create jobs in this province. I mean, it's thank goodness the federal government seen it wise to put this shipbuilding contract here, but I'm going to assure you it's nothing that the government did on the other side of the house. It was a decision that was made because the Irving Shipyard is very good quality work and have history in building ships. And I think that the Minister of Defense said it so probably best. He said there was something to do with $1.5 million, almost a might as well flush it out in the harbor. As far as the contract goes, I don't know if that's true or not, but that was quoted in the newspaper. So it just makes you wonder, what is this government going to do in this new Nova Scotia Jobs Fund? It's almost like the signs that we see on the road. Well, I got a couple of signs up my riding that says that the Minister of Transportation, the Premier's name on him, making jobs for Nova Scotians. Well, I think there was a couple of potholes in one that they fixed and put a big sign up for it. It cost more to put sign up than the work they did. So that's creating jobs, I guess, making signs, putting signs up, but sure didn't do very much to get anything done. And everywhere you go, I want to challenge people in the province to call in, tell our caucus what's going on when you see one of those signs that here it is, better jobs for Nova Scotians, right? Here they are with the Premier's name and the Minister of Transportation's name on the sign, and tell us what's going on in that spot. I can tell you some pretty little tiny jobs are happening, but the signs are big, sounds great, but the local people in the area sure aren't getting any benefit from it. Maybe they're getting a big pothole fixed somewhere, but well, some of the projects are good size. It was question period talked about a couple of them today, or one of them in particular today, or whatever. It'd be interesting to find out when that all shakes out what's happening there. But when you look at the things that need to be done, I talked before, you know, we have the highest high-speed internet, highest speed of internet in the world in Nova Scotia, in the world. Are we capitalizing on that? I don't hear the government talking about that anywhere. Nowhere. Don't talk about it at all. It's there. It's there. It's here. All we have to do is capitalize on it. Not any idea about it. And I mentioned it to people before, and they didn't even know it existed. I mean, didn't even know it existed. The previous government put in an aggressive bill on taxation on windmills. Most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And the worst thing is, this government didn't do anything to fix it. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. We talk about renewable energy and how things are going to be great and wonderful. And here we go. We got bills like that going on, and it makes you wonder why the economy is not going. It's obvious why it's not going. I mean, it's just obvious. You put all these things together and see what happens. Well, you talk about wind energy. Talk about wind energy. In Porters Lake, they have a windmill up for the superstore. And everybody in the community just loves the thing. It's a good thing. And find out that, indeed, it helps reduce the cost, helps the greenhouse gases that they would have to do. But I also found out, and I'd be corrected on this if I'm wrong, but I believe somebody complained somewhere in Dartmouth about this windmill in Porters Lake. They don't even live out there. Because the superstore was going to put these up all over the place. And now they complained, and HRM passed a bylaw, you can't put a windmill up by a grocery store. Well, it makes me wonder what's going on. It really makes me wonder. Now, there's some reasons you shouldn't have windmills in some places, and that's fine. But if we're going to have renewable energy, energy that we can afford in this province, and keep our families and our land clean and environmentally sound, we've got to look at things like windmills and many more things in renewable energy, because renewable energy goes in a big package, not just one thing. And I know when you look at economic development, this job fund they're talking about here, you know, there's not a program in the province would make a lot of jobs for really solid improvements in insulation in homes. Now, they got some programs there, but I can tell you some of the programs that are out there, the federal government's got one now, you got to spend $5,000 or $6,000 or more. You got to finance it yourself up front and do the work, wait for the money to come in, and you're a long, long time getting it back. Well, I can tell you, I know all kinds of people that cannot afford to do this. They can't afford to do it. And these are the people that really should have this done to their homes so their heating costs go down. Also helps the environment because we don't need so much to burn so many fossil fuels in order to heat homes. And you talk about, you know, putting solar panels on a home. Well, I've done a lot of work on my home in the last few years myself, and with some help. And I can tell you now that I've insulated the home properly, a solar panel will work. But before that, it would not have worked. It would have been wasting my time to buy one. So you see, you've got to have the two things go together. And there's lots of opportunity for manufacturing these pieces of equipment in Nova Scotia. But with a regressive tax structure this government has put in place and continues to put in place, and the labor laws that are getting so much out of line and so far out of line that nobody is going to want to run a business in Nova Scotia. And my question is, when all this transpires, when it finally comes to the day that we don't have enough businesses in the province generating good revenue that can indeed pay their taxes, not just recirculating money, not just government jobs, because they just recirculate money. And there's nothing wrong with government jobs, don't get me wrong, as long as it's a reasonable need for them. It's just recirculating money with government jobs. Who's going to pay the bills? Nobody. So then how are you going to pay the huge debt that's in the province? What happens if the interest rate goes up on the debt in this province? Think about that. If the interest rate goes up in this province and goes up substantially on the long-term debt in this province, we can no longer pay the debt. No longer pay the debt. So then what happens in the province? From what I understand, New Zealand went that through a few years ago, and they had some pretty serious things happen. Brought a receiver in, and the people that had government jobs that thought would last forever and ever and ever were escorted by the police out of the building, and the only thing you could take was the clothes they're wearing and any personal things they had, and that was the end of their job. There was no severance packages, there was nothing, just eliminated, gone. So is that where we're headed for in Nova Scotia? Maybe. Who knows? I hope not. I certainly hope not. But I guarantee you, with some of the things that are happening here now, it's unbelievable. We got some of the highest workers' compensation rates in the country. And when you look at all the costs in Nova Scotia, if you take the cost running the business in Nova Scotia, if you look at the payroll on an individual in Nova Scotia, it used to be at 14%, but I'm probably guessing now, and I haven't reviewed it in a while, it's around 17%, maybe 18%. And that's by a business that runs a very smooth, clear business. In the civil service, it must be around 22 or 24% cost to keep an employee. That's just overhead costs over and above wages. So when you take all those things into consideration, and you look at the cost it costs to run a business in Nova Scotia, it is not a place to work here. It is not a place to run a business. And the only thing that used to save us was our resource industries. Well, the codfish are gone. Thank goodness the lobster's up for now. They were down in price, so that means that there's less money coming into the province for the same amount of lobster caught. And now the forest industry is dying. The Macterra just had the old Macterra, Middle Muscatawba Harbour, just had a big auction on Saturday and cleaned up whatever was left of the equipment off. It's gone. Hopefully some of it stayed in the province. I bet you a lot of it didn't. And when you look at these things all happening, and the mining industry is almost shut down in the province, and some of it should be, some of it shouldn't be, but people have to realize that we have to have businesses. They've got to be environmentally sound, and they've got to be safe. But with all these resource industry gone, that was a backfall that Nova Scotia always had. And those are just, they're going by the wayside. We've seen the big paper mill in Port Hawkesbury close down. Hopefully they find a new operator. But one of the problems with the mill was they didn't have a market for their product. No market for the product. Now that could be serious. It could be very, very serious. And those are well-paid jobs in a rural area that really made a significant impact on the economy of the whole province. Those people in that area were building homes, they were buying vehicles, they were going on vacations, and even if it was just to Halifax for a weekend, it put money back in here. Or they were going to some other place in the province for a vacation. It kept money in Nova Scotia, and it was money that was solid money in the province. And as we see these manufacturing jobs vanish, what kind of jobs are they replaced with? Well, there's some IT jobs out there, but they can be done from any place. I mean, you can run an IT business from anywhere in the world you want now, and your customers can be anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter. And most of the new younger generation, distance doesn't matter, and it does matter what kind of product they have and who their customers are. So that opens up a wide spectrum of businesses. So why would you operate in Nova Scotia? With higher income tax, higher GST, fees for higher on everything, high property taxes. The list goes on and on and on. And a lot of these taxes have been put in place by the government that's sitting over there now, the NDP government. So much for a better deal for Nova Scotians, or today's families. I think that was the slogan. I don't know what the deal is, but it's not a good deal. When you look at all this thing and you see how it's unfolding, and you see how difficult it is for families when they see the young people from their families move out west. And what's another thing that's happening in Nova Scotia now too that's quite unusual, and it's never, I don't think it's ever happened before. A lot of people that are retired with an average income in the retirement funds are actually moving out of the province. I know some people that have looked at this situation and they said if they move, two people with a reasonable pension, not a huge pension, a reasonable pension, so if they move to Ontario, they can save $6,000 a year in personal income tax. Think about that. That's $6,000 a year over Nova Scotia they can save by moving to Ontario. Now, if they moved to Alberta, they'd even save more. That's nothing to do with the GST or a property tax or anything else. $6,000 a year. Now, if you got a couple that's retired, they can save $6,000 a year in income tax. That means they've got $6,000 a year of disposable income. Now, what do they do with that disposable income? They could invest in their home. They could invest in travel. They could invest in all kinds of things. But it means that that money that they get, which won't change, it'll stay stable the whole time, over a 10-year period, that's $60,000 they have to spend. Never mind all the other things that are cheaper there. So if we get the people that are retired here, especially if they got a government pension, Nova Scotia government pension, we're not even recirculating the money anymore. It's going outside of the province and going to be spent in another province, in another location, where indeed they're going to benefit from it, but Nova Scotia is going to end up paying the bill, and the taxpayers in Nova Scotia are going to pay the bill. You know, it's hard to believe we've had no real attempt for economic growth in this province. None. There's a few little tokens that the present government's put out there, but really don't do anything. And I have a friend that started a business a while ago, wanted some training. And he called me up, and he was shocked, absolutely shocked. There was some training programs that were available. He was quite interested in them, actually, because he never ran a business before, and he wanted to find out about it. And he said some of the courses that are given, mandatory, have to be given by the unions to small business. There's something wrong with this story. What's going on here? He couldn't believe it. He said, well, needless to say, I'm not going to take any of those courses. I'll have to find out some other way. So it makes you wonder what's going on. Is it payback time from the last election, the previous elections? I don't know. That question was raised today here in the House in question period about payback for some of the people that contributed to the NDP during the last election and previous elections. And it makes you wonder when you're going to take a course that's provided by the province, and the province is telling you you have to get a union to take, the union is going to give you this course. So I can't imagine, and I know a lot of people in unions, I got a lot of respect for unions, what a union would know about running a business. They don't. They represent employees. Employees don't know how to run businesses. They don't. They help run the business. They help generate a good business, but they don't know how to run a business. Running a business is a very difficult task, and very few people survive at it. I think the failure rate in the first 2 years of business, it's like 80% or something like that, and the next 2 years is 65% above that. So it's very, very difficult. Some people learn how to run a business very quickly. Some people never learn. But a union represents employees. And how do they know how to run a business and help a business person run a business? They don't. But yet the province is mandating that has to happen. So there's something wrong with this picture. And you add this all up, And there's rumors of a new bill coming in here that would make it even more unionized in the province. How is a small business going to survive? How? If you compete, let's take a southern U.S. company manufacturing some kind of a gadget. And their gasoline is 84 cents a liter roughly. Ours is $1.25 today, and it was $1.30. So they get a disadvantage there. Property taxes here in the building here is probably $40,000 or $50,000 a year. In the southern U.S., probably $1,000 a year. Your employees make less money, probably 1/2 of what they make here. So you add that. You got lower income taxes. They got lower corporate taxes. And when you put all this together, then you say, and making the same widgets. So you go to the same trade show, and you go to the same trade show, and your widget is worth $500, and their widget is worth $500, but they're charging $250 for it. Guess who's going to sell the widget? It won't be you at $500. It will not be. And I can tell you, anyone that's done this, and I've done this, I've gone and I've manufactured products in Nova Scotia, and I've exported them all over the world. And nobody over there has done that. Nobody. They don't even know what I'm talking about. None of you have done that. None. And I can tell you it's difficult to do. You sit down at a table in a meeting with someone in Europe that wants to do business with you, boys, you better know what you're talking about. Because those guys do. And you talk to somebody in the U.S., they know what they're doing. And here we are in Nova Scotia, taxing people to death, regressive taxing, not encouraging the growth of businesses, and you wonder why. Why are all the kids going to Alberta? Why? It's obvious. Can't get a job here because there's no businesses here that'll hire them because you don't have the businesses. And wait, just wait a little while. All the electricians, all the plumbers, and all the bricklayers in this province are getting very near retirement, and very few young people, because the young people are going out west. We're going to have a crisis in the trades like you wouldn't believe. And I can tell you what's going to happen. It's going to happen if your plumbing acts up in your house and you don't know how to fix it yourself, or you don't know somebody else that can help you fix it. You're going to have to hire a plumber, not at $65 an hour, not at $90 an hour. You're going to be paying $200 an hour for a plumber to come in and fix it, if you can find them. If you can find them. And that's going to be pretty serious. And even it's the same as their heating system fails in the middle of winter. That fails, and you can't find someone to fix it, because these young people are leaving. They're leaving the province. They get trained here, and they're gone. But you can't keep the people here if they're charging them more income tax, if you're making it more difficult for businesses to work here, and that's what's happening. It is happening. Anyone that realizes how difficult it is to get a tradesperson now. I have a friend of mine that's a contractor, and he's building a home. And he tried to get a bricklayer, the same guy that he used for years and years and years, and the guy says, look, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. He said, all my guys have gone out west. They work with me. I've only got 1 or 2 guys working with me, and I've got enough work just for us, and I can't do your job for you. He tried 4 different companies that he dealt with before, and not one of them could do the work. Fortunately, he did find a small guy that works with himself and one other guy that just happened to be between jobs. Now that's fine, get the small guys working, but most of the bulk of these guys are gone. And as these guys retire out of the business, who's going to take their place? The apprenticeship program takes a long time. It takes a long time to train a tradesman. It takes 8 years to train a machinist. 8 years. You know, anyone has a machine shop and a machinist walks in the door, 99% of the time, they'll give them a job on the spot. No interview, nothing, because they can't get them. And that's been the case for 50 years in this province. Only difference is now, there's fewer machine shops, a lot less work. So it's more difficult to get the people, and the young people are going out west again. They're going out west, where they can make 2 or 3 times, 4 times as much money as they do here. And the businesses out there are making money, and they're reinvesting in the economy. And when they reinvest in the economy, that gives the province, and particularly Alberta, and even some of the other provinces now, a lot of money to work with. And indeed, they pay lower taxes. But if the economy's growing, you're getting it from a bigger tax base, so you're probably getting more taxes anyway. So, you know, as you go through the process and see what's happening in Nova Scotia, I can see the housing deteriorating in a lot of areas where people can't afford to keep them. And a lot of difficulties happening. And Madam Speaker, I'll wrap up for today, but I want to continue at a later date.
Thank you. Is the member, excuse me, is the honourable member adjourning debate? Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. Tomorrow we will meet from the hours of 2 to 6 p.m. And now I turn over to the House Leader of the Official Opposition to call business for tomorrow.
Thank you. I recognize the Official Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Tomorrow, the House, as the Government House Leader has said, will meet from 2 p.m. till 6 p.m. Following the daily routine, we'll be calling Bill number 66 and Resolution number 1869. I move that we do now adjourn to meet again tomorrow at 2 p.m.
Thank you. The motion is that we now rise to meet again tomorrow, Wednesday, November 2nd, between the hours of 2 and 6 p.m. All in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. We're now at the moment of interruption, and I now call under Rule number 5.5, as read earlier today, a resolution put forward by the Honourable Member for Hants West. And it reads, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly urge the NDP government to stop downloading their financial hardships to the backs of hard-working Nova Scotians and admit that their broken MOU is just another hidden NDP tax. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Queens.
Madam Speaker, thank you for allowing me to rise in my place to speak to this resolution this evening. Nova Scotia is a great place to live, work, and raise a family. We are working hard to provide better health care sooner, create good jobs, grow the economy, and make life more affordable for families, while also living within our means. This government is committed to those